Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I didn't know this talk was happening until just recently, so I'm really happy I stayed, and thank you for coming. Oftentimes in discussions I'm having with people who I've gone to school with and friends of mine, oftentimes over Facebook, where things quickly get lost and, no nuance exists there and everything. Oftentimes it feels like really the best thing that I, as a cisgendered male, can do is to die. And I realize that now, hearing you talk and everything, that this is kind of the result of the pendulum being swung very far to one end. And I was wondering if you thought that are we now at the point where a pendulum is about to swing back into a more kind of moderate, let's all actually do something together and treat each other as equals, all genders, all races kind of thing?
Well, I'm calling for men to take control again of their own lives. So I've said in a recent interview that if there's a women's center at Yale University, which there is for the undergraduates, then there should be a men's center. There should be absolute equality. And the men should be totally free to do whatever they want in their men's center. Okay? They can show dirty movies or whatever they want. Okay? This constantly beating down of men, okay? This demand that men redefine themselves until they suit what feminists want them to be, it's an outrage. Okay? And I'm saying throughout this book and the pieces I've written over the years, that the civilization, with all of its protections and conveniences, is essentially the invention of men. Now, I explain that in my first book, Sexual Personae, by saying that woman's power is so enormous that men had to band together to go off and to create these objective structures. And I still think that my analysis of it is absolutely right. But it's men who are doing all of the hardest and dirtiest work in society. I told in a recent interview of that there's a whole list of things. Okay? When there's an ice storm, okay, in the Northeast, it's the men who go out at 2 a.m. with the live wires and so on. I rarely see women, okay, going out at that hour. I never see women manning the great vats of tar in the heat of the summer that people are mixing to put on the roof. Okay, I never see the women as I did last year, saw an enormous sewage break in a neighboring town with where men in hazmat suits were up to their knees in wastewater. Okay? Not a single woman wants to volunteer for that kind of work. People are still depending on men and keeping working class men invisible. I've launched an attack, for example, on Sheryl Sandberg, right? As incredibly smugly entitled, talking about leaning in while at the same time concealing from sight all of those servants that she has and the nannies that she has, okay, who are working class people who are supporting her particular very public lifestyle. So I think in general, it's men are erased, the contributions of men are erased, and also the contributions of working class people are erased. And this has to stop. Okay, it has to stop. We need a much more enlightened feminism. I think that most men are in favor of women rising in society and being in charge in society. We're no longer in the antediluvian old days. So I want men, okay, to recover a sense of who they are as men again, okay, and not feel they have to obey any list, like a checklist being issued by Gloria Steinem and company in Manhattan. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So a lot of what you're saying is very, very offensive and bothersome to me as a cisgendered man living in the year 2017 in this city. And to your point about the ice storms in the Northeast and how women aren't out there fighting them, well, why don't you think about like these institutions that, that like road crews and the like microaggressions and the sexism on these crews of the working class man. I'm a landscaper, and I can tell you that there is a huge degree of like. Okay, my question is about, do you believe that sexism is relevant? Because you said that women have to stop blaming men for their unhappiness. And nowhere in there was a discussion of sexism in the workplace, that women are like treated as less smart, as less capable. And it seems to me that your words are sort of reinforcing this notion, especially in terms of the workplace.
Well, I am an equity feminist. That is, I believe in the removal of all advances to women's, all obstacles to women's advance in society in the professional and political realm. So absolutely, I'm very focused on any instance of workplace sexism. What I'm saying in my writing is that we are not simply working individuals, all right? There is a public side of our life and there is a private side of our life. In Sexual Personae, 700-page book, I talked about the psychological, the dream life of mankind. There are all kinds of primitive impulses in us that are very atavistic. Do we want to understand ourselves as human beings or what? Okay, we cannot simply define human beings in terms of what we are in the workplace or in the political realm. I believe that was actually the biggest legacy of the 1960s. 1960s were about turning away from materialistic careerism and embarking on a kind of cosmic quest for meaning in the universe. So I think that my work offers a kind of dual perspective. I'm talking about women's advance in society and what best helps that, and I'm also talking about our need as human beings to expand our imaginations. Even though I'm an atheist, I have a very spiritualistic view of the universe, and that is my particular vibration with Native American culture. That's in fact what I'm doing for the last 9 years, is trying to map, okay, the actual metaphysical, religious perspective of the ancient Native Americans. I believe that my views of things as represented in Sexual Personae are very much in vibe with that.
Hey, Camille. Thanks for coming. I haven't read any of your books, but I've seen your videos, so I'm a fan. Anyway, I can't remember which video it was, but you were talking about college education, and you're fed up with the whole cafeteria style, I think you called it, the invent your own major. You think you should go back to a survey sort of, and I graduated from college several months ago, so I've never taken a survey course in my life. So I was hoping you could talk about what you think the benefit to that type of education would be.
Yes, I think that's been an absolute disaster what's happened in the last 30 years. I'm speaking, of course, as a career college teacher, which is this degeneration into the cafeteria menu, where young people arrive in college and say, you can take this or this or this or this or this or this, and then you have all these kind of narrow courses being offered by professors who are basically teaching what they're interested in. I think that is not education at all. Okay, that the best kind of education gives the broad view. Okay? The abandonment of the great art history survey course has been a cultural disaster in this country, where it used to be you had 2 semesters, you would begin with cave art, the Stone Age, and move all the way down by the end of the second semester to abstract expressionism and modernism. Right? This gives a sense of the narrative of history. But of course, in postmodernism and poststructuralism, all narratives are false. Okay, everything. Please. Okay, there is a narrative in history. There is. Okay, I've talked about how the pillar forms, okay, created by Imhotep at the pyramid complex at Saqqara, okay, in Egypt, that can be seen 5,000 years later, okay, in our Corinthian columns and banks all over the United States and Europe and so on. People who deal with artifacts of archaeology and history, can recognize the legacy and the continuity in cultural traditions. So yes, I think that colleges need to be very stripped down. They need to be making decisions decisions about about what they're going to teach. Now, I have been saying for 25 years that for me, the best multiculturalism would be to teach comparative religion, the world religions, right, as a way to introduce students to the world, not just to the Western tradition, to the entire world. And if my plan had been followed, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems today in the incomprehension about Islam. People would already know about the sacred texts, okay, and would be able to discuss, okay, that this group, okay, is following these particular verses of the Quran, this group is doing that, and it wouldn't be this chaos which we have right now. And this period of secular humanism is an absolute failure, okay? Young people, okay, are starved for meaning. That's why they're clinging to politics. But you cannot cling to politics. Politics and the social realm, this is minor. It's a minor part of human existence. Okay? There's something much bigger, okay? Much bigger, the universe. Okay? There are whole wells of deep meaning out there beyond the political realm. I'm not saying not to demand social reform. I'm not saying, you know, to cease to be progressive and to look for the most just human society possible. But I am saying that there is a kind of mania abroad right now, a total obsession, okay, with politics. This is a betrayal of the legacy of the 60s, a betrayal of the tremendous vision, the cosmic vision of the 1960s. And I've written about this. I believe that the reason for that is that the apostles of that particular spiritual quest of the 60s are lost to us because they took so much LSD, they never came back. That's the problem. They never wrote the books, which should have been the companion books to my own work. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for coming. I read Sexual Persona during a time when I was recovering from a incident with sexism. And so workplace sexism definitely is something that affects a lot of women. What can male allies do to help alleviate the common situation of workplace sexism in a way that doesn't overly blame them for the problem?
Well, I'm saying that a real man is honorable. Okay? A real man respects women. And that any man who abuses women or treats them in a denigrating fashion is showing weakness, a weakness that in fact comes from some inner sense that he has of woman's overwhelming power. Okay? And to prove that, I had to write a 700-page book. Okay, all right. So I'm calling for a mutual recognition, a mutual respect between the sexes, but I'm also calling for middle-class girls to stop asking for special protections. Again, I want equality of treatment in the workplace, but I think there's too much decrying, okay, of men's behavior, when in fact what too many white upper middle class girls are bringing now, okay, to the workplace is a certain manner of speaking, okay, that is removed from the actual harshness of the world. That actually working class women, whether they come from the farmland or they come from the street, okay, understand the risks and dangers of the world. So some of the most controversial writing that I've done is about the need, okay, for women to be Amazon warriors for themselves. Okay, that is my philosophy is street smart feminism, okay, or Amazonism. That's why I pose with weapons in so many of my pictures. All right, it's up to women themselves to understand the dangers of the world, not expect the world to be an extension of their protected, comfortable middle class living room. And that's, I think, what's happened. I see women whose voices aren't strong enough. Okay, women have to learn, okay, not to be embarrassed, okay, to be loud, okay, and to confront when it happens. I see too many cases of women who are dismayed by something which they feel is demeaning and who just accept it. All right, and that is not no. No, the first time it happens, you speak out. You speak out. You stop it. You're in their face, like immediately, you see? Okay? And that's what I believe I represent, okay? Which is that every moment of every day, you have a responsibility to protect your own dignity, okay? And it doesn't matter if you're embarrassed or you create an embarrassing situation. You protect yourself. Now, you see, when my generation arrived in college, 1964, the parietal rules were in full, in full power. So that at Harper College, State University of New York at Binghamton, where I went to college, the girls had to sign in at 11 o'clock at night into the dorms. And the guys could run free all night long, okay? And so it's my generation of women who said, right, we want the same treatment as men. We want the equality, okay, and freedom that men enjoy. And the colleges said, no, the world is dangerous, okay? We must protect you. We must protect you against rape. And we said, give us the freedom to risk rape. Freedom. Freedom is the value, not protection, okay? So it dismays me to see young women today wanting the parent figures back, okay? Wanting the oversight, wanting to run to committees when something goes wrong on a date. I oppose that, okay? I think it's infantilizing, and women have got to stop doing that, okay? They have to govern their own relationships with men or with anyone else. Okay? And that is the only way women will ever become totally free and totally equal.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
You just mentioned, you compared the agrarian period with the physical effort of that era that created strength in women and men, and then going into the modern era where people became more fragile. Do you think that modern society with technology is sustainable? Because constantly we are removing all of our stresses and all of our efforts from the environment.
Yes, I am concerned. Yes, first of all, the technology today has become our art form. There's no doubt, okay, that that the constant modulations and evolution, okay, of our handheld devices and so on, it's the equivalent of art forms in another society. But I am very concerned about our excessive dependency on this new virtual reality. Now, I love the web. I was in the from the founding issue of Salon magazine. I've been part of it, etc. But I'm very concerned because I see a pattern from ancient history, which is when you have empires which become extremely affluent and extremely complicated. You get very complex bureaucratic structures, and everything gets so interwoven that it's very easy for the whole thing to collapse. And at the same time, you get an affluent, educated class that's extremely tolerant. Okay, that is rather hedonistic, that has no scruples about heterosexuality, homosexuality, and so on. Anything goes. Etc. They're in the ancient Roman period. They're vacationing on Capri and in Pompeii and so on. So I am concerned, okay, that we're heading toward a civilization that is so complex and so dependent on other people, and particularly on electric power. All it will take, okay, is one gigantic asteroid burst, okay, that takes down the power grid, and all of a sudden, mankind is going to be scrabbling back to the primitive and barbaric realm again. So I do feel some concern about the fragility of our culture and our removal from nature, our removal, and with secular humanism has also gone this cosmic vision I was talking about, right, and the lack of this larger perspective. So yes, I mean, I don't. I think there's reason. I feel I feel shadows coming. Yes. Okay.
But you see no exit from this cycle.
My theory of history is cyclic. I believe everything. That's what I see, a kind of organic pattern in history as in artistic styles. Things begin, and great ideas, high energy. It grows to a certain point, and then you start to get the decadence. Now, I love decadence. Okay, all right. I mean, Oscar Wilde was, after all, my very first influence. So I feel like I'm a decadent at the fall of imperial Rome. That's why I'm very interested in in androgyny. That's been my subject, since I was in college, the subject of my dissertation. I consider myself transgender, okay, and I think people are starting to understand that my book, Sexual Personae, was a transgender book, okay, that it was a transgender protest against the power of nature. Finally, I think people are starting to wake up to that. Okay.
It's very nice to see another Southern Tier native and Binghamton grad.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't.
I said it's very nice to see another Southern Tier native
Oh, you're
and
Southern
Binghamton
Tier.
grad.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay.
We have a common upbringing, and our fathers knew each other.
Oh.
And you're very big on extended family, clan, and tribe. Mm-hmm. What sort of paradigm would you see for making this relevant in the 21st century?
Well, I'm not sure that we can ever recover that tribal, connectedness any longer. But I do see it still surviving for working class families much more than for upper middle class families. I noticed this, for example, when going to the New Jersey shore just to walk on the beach and so on. I see in those working class resorts of like the Wildwoods, right, how often you have multi-generations of families vacationing together. Okay, it makes me quite nostalgic. That is something that's completely gone from the upper middle class. The more affluent you are, the less likely it is that you're going to go vacation with your parents, okay, where people run off to expensive resorts in the Caribbean and so on. They're not taking, the grandparents with them, right? But working class families in Fairmount Park, in Philadelphia, every week you can see immigrant families still, African American families. They'll come for a day in the park with the food, toys, football, etc. They'll take some park benches, the barbecue pits, and so on. Spend the whole day there. Multiple generations of a family all together for the day at the park. And every time I see that, it takes me all the way back to Endicott and to what I remember that's lost now, okay, which is that everyone knowing each other, the people who came from the same town in Italy, and the people would grow up next to each other. People didn't move. Today we're in a very transient culture where people, to get a job, will go hundreds of miles, thousands of miles far from the extended family. So what you have today, it's great difficulty for women trying to manage a household, okay, and also a job at the same time. Simultaneous is the collapse of the old extended family into the nuclear family. Now, what I'm saying in my work is that I think the nuclear family is toxic. This is something new, and this is what conservatives, my argument with conservatives, who constantly talk about, the need for a two-parent family and so on. I'm going, throughout most of human history, okay, there has never been a two-parent family. Okay, it has been a multi-generational family has raised, the children, right? Not just two. So I believe that what we have today in America so often is like these houses lined up next to each other with a two-parent family and the children. These actually are kind of toxic cubicles for neurosis. Okay, I don't necessarily think that has ever been a healthy prescription for children to be raised. And another thing is that at first the women had benefited enormously from the invention of all these labor-saving appliances like the automatic washer and dryer and so on. Right? Saves women so much time compared to all the laborious doing of the laundry and rinsing out squeezing the water out and so on. But now today, the laundry, which used to be a communal activity with other women, has turned into an isolated, lonely thing, for women. Okay? You're trapped in a house to do the laundry, okay, etc. And also, the higher up you rise in affluence, the less likely it is that you know the neighbors. Okay, you don't know the neighbors, all right? And even if you know the neighbors, you would never dream of saying to them, oh, something's come up. Can you just watch, my 2 or 3 children, okay, while I just run to... You would never do that in a million years, okay, in an affluent neighborhood. Whereas in a working class neighborhood, people know each other, they trust each other. And also, people in working class neighborhoods, particularly in cities like South Philadelphia, are oriented toward the street. They're watching, they're sitting on the stoop, they're sitting on the porch. Okay, so there's this sense of a neighborhood that's it's like a real community of the old days. So again, I think that as people move up the economic scale in terms of affluence and power in the workplace, they're actually getting more and more neurotic, okay, because of the psychological dislocations that have not been, I think, fully confronted. So I don't know exactly how to recover these things, but I do think that it's useful for women to realize, okay, how much they've lost in terms of their solidarity with other women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm pretty obsessed with politics.
And I am too. I follow it constantly. Yes. Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts on the forces that allowed the rise of Mr. Trump, especially in the media.
Well, I mean, I am a Democrat. I supported Bernie Sanders. I voted eventually for the second time for Jill Stein of the Green Party and so on. I view the victory of Trump as a response to the failures of the Democratic Party to confront real problems. There are long-standing problems in the United States that the Democrats had no solutions to. All right. I felt this coming, for a very long time. I thought it was a terrible mistake to allow the DNC to push Hillary Clinton through as the nominee. I'm sorry, it's just my opinion. All right. And I don't think that, and quite frankly, I wish that there had been younger candidates in both parties. I think it's about time for my generation, the baby boomers, to get off the stage, for heaven's sakes. I wanted nominees for both parties to be younger people in their 40s or early 50s, and I don't know how it happened. Okay, that we ended up with so many older nominees. So I think that I hope there's going to be a great blast of energy into the political system soon. Okay, but it's important for my party, for the Democrats, to do seems to me a very clear-eyed analysis of the reasons for the loss, because there were real issues about job creation and other things. Reduction of the federal bureaucracy, okay, was an issue the Democrats were helpless with. Okay, I think that bureaucracy is, to me, an octopus, a parasite, whether it's in Washington or it's on the college campuses. Bureaucrats, are automatons. Okay, they are absolutely soulless. Okay, the minute you allow any entity to be run by bureaucrats, okay, we're in trouble. Okay, so the Democrats just want to add on and add on and add on. Okay, this is not the way. I don't call that progressive. Okay, progressive is to deconstruct the bureaucracies. So again, Democrats have to come up with better solutions to problems, and they'll start winning again.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
I would just like to ask you to talk some about the differences between men and women that you think are really important, whether they're hardwired or have developed over thousands of years in feeling, in thinking, in sex drive, in workplace, whatever you want to say about that.
Well, I analyze this at length in Sexual Persona. Yes, I speak about biological factors and the way the mind works. For example, I mean, it's slightly satirical in Chapter 1 of Sexual Persona, but I think I'm right, which is that boys have to learn, because of their genital anatomy, how to aim. Right? If they don't learn how to aim, okay, when they try to urinate, okay, they will soil themselves and the wall and everything else, okay? They must learn to aim. Okay, and eventually that carries over into the sex act. All right, and so I talk about that, the focus and purposiveness and directedness. Okay, and how Freud it talks about how primitive man preened himself on his ability to put out a fire. Okay, with a stream of urine. Okay, and I say well, that's a strange thing to be proud of, but beyond the scope of any woman. All right, who would scorch her hams in the process of trying to put out a fire with a stream of urine. All right, so I do believe, okay, that there are sexual differences. I think that that as civilizations evolve, as they become more complicated, that gender eventually has a performance quality, that it becomes an artifact, like other artifacts, like works of art. I mean, that's why I have a 700-page book on this subject, my first book. But that ultimately there are very fundamental sexual differences that come from the fact that most men have 8 to 10 times the amount of testosterone in their bodies than women do. Right? And that, I mean, for my entire life I've noticed the way men talk and think is different. I mean, heterosexual men talk and think different than the way women think. I remember my father saying when he would listen to the women talking, my mother, my aunt, and all of it. He said he could never follow the conversation. No names were being used. And sentences weren't being ended, okay? But yet everyone knew exactly what they were talking about, okay? And I've noticed that myself. People will say, "Oh, did he see that? He saw that. Oh, okay. He saw that. She saw. Oh, okay. All right. So, all right. And that's why I love the Real Housewives. Okay, it's I adore the Real Housewives. Gloria Steinem hates it. Okay, you see. But the Real Housewives absolutely, okay, records and documents the way women are in a group. Okay, now maybe not dissenting women, maybe not lesbian women, okay? I'm just talking about heterosexual women, okay? All right, in a group. I love to be around heterosexual women talking in a group, okay? And so do a lot of gay men. That's why they're stylists and so on and so forth, okay? There's like a weird energy, okay, that the women have with each other, okay? It goes all the way back to the hunter-gatherer era, okay, where the women were all talking with each other around the hut while the men went off in the hunting party and had to be quiet and silent while they stalked the prey. You see, the talkative men didn't last long, okay? Okay? All right? But, at the same time, so I do feel that, that transgender people and that, many gay men occupy kind of middle ground, between the sexes, all right? And a tremendous amount of the history of the arts, okay, it was created in that middle ground, okay? That the transgender shamans had a vision of the universe, had an intuitive quality, but biologically speaking, every single cell of the human body, the DNA has a DNA code in it, which tells you what the actual gender of that body is. So that I think that there's a lot of talk these days about the ability to change sex, but you cannot change sex, in point of fact. You can make modifications of the body. You can take hormones that further change the appearance of the body, but ultimately, at a certain point, every single cell in the human body will continue to show that it is either male or female, except for a very tiny number of truly intersex people. And now, I don't know what I exactly belong to. I do, never for, a day in my life have I felt female. Never for a minute in my life have I felt female. But I don't feel like a man either, okay? So I'm willing to acknowledge, that I have a gender dysphoria, okay? And out of that gender dysphoria, I made a lot of books, okay? My books are my sex change. I've said that sexual persona is the biggest sex change in history, okay? And in fact, the truest thing ever said about sexual persona was by this gay intellectual guy in Massachusetts who ran the Gay and Lesbian Review back in the 90s. He said, the voice of sexual persona is the voice of Myra Breckinridge. Now, Myra Breckenridge was the transsexual star of a Gore Vidal book that was made into a movie that should have been a great movie with Raquel Welch. It was a terrible movie, all right? But that is really true. My voice is the voice of a transsexual. This is absolutely true, okay? But nevertheless, I believe, and that's why I've called my book, okay, Free Women, Free Men, that it's time to valorize, okay, the sexes. Transgender people in the middle, okay, actually gain identity from the existence of the mass of men and the mass of women. Okay, so I applaud you as a man. Okay.
Thank you so much for being bold and going into the non-PC realm and empowers people like me. I sort of grew up Baptist Taliban, if you will, and I made the jump to libertarianism. And I would just like to ask you, from my perspective, libertarianism is about empowerment. It is the party the women should be migrating to, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how do we draw more women to the libertarian philosophy and explain to them that it is the party of empowerment, whereas the Democrat, progressive, the idea is sort of to replace men with the government, whereas the libertarian philosophy is to empower women and while also empowering men. So
yes.
how would we do that?
Yes, I do call myself a libertarian as well, even though I'm not really part of the Libertarian Party, at all. But yes, I think this is really true. What you said exactly right. Okay, we cannot have a situation where women now substitute the government, okay, for the male figures upon which we used to depend, okay, for economic sustenance. I think we need many more actually parties in the United States. The problem is we have these like giant big tent parties. The two, okay, which suck up, all the oxygen and all the money and become a kind of porridge. Okay, there's no clear thing. But countries that have multiple parties, 12 or 13 parties, often are very fractured. They have to form coalitions in order to govern. So I can see the difficulty of multiple parties in a country of our size. But there's absolutely no doubt that we need tremendous drastic reform of the present party structure. And I think it will only come from the challenge. Okay, that's what I'm trying to develop, on the Green Party too. Even though I don't necessarily agree with everything the Green Party stands for. So are you? Would you say that you, in terms of your economic policy as a libertarian, do you think you tend more toward conservative or capitalist or what? How do you?
I find myself to be fiscally conservative. I think that free enterprise has brought more people out of poverty than any government program, and I've traveled overseas quite a bit, and I've seen that. I think that we're facing a situation where we don't have free enterprise. We have burdensome regulation and taxation that's sort of suppressing small businesses and individuals to the advantage of too big to fail corporations. We bail out the banks, we kick out the the homeowners.
Yes.
So I would say yes, I'm fiscally conservative.
Yes, I feel that what we need especially in the inner city, okay, in high school, is the teaching of entrepreneurship, okay, to disadvantaged youth, to show them the way the system can work. And everything about the kind of thing that comfortable middle class and upper middle class young people get from their parents who know about banking and stock investment and so on. I mean, I definitely believe in a much more jobs-oriented educational system, both at the high school and the college level. Okay, well, I think we are at the same mind. Okay.
Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Be the change.
Thank you. Great. Okay. All right. Very good. No more questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming.